Okay, let's get started defining the models. As this is an e-commerce site, we'll start with product. So we go to our model project, right click, add class, and we shall call it product. By default, it creates class product. Now what that does is it will mean it would only be accessible from within this project. We wouldn't be able to access it from any of these other projects, which of course is no good. So what we need to do is set it as a public class. The next important part is we need to define an integer of product ID. Entity Framework will use that to determine it as being the key. It does that by looking at the first part and then looks at ID. So because our class is called product, it'll see product ID and know that needs to be the key. You don't have to set it that way. You can use what is called decorators to set a key, and that would tell Entity Framework that that's what you wanted it to be. But if we're calling it product ID anyway, we don't necessarily need that. Let's also create a description. Let's create somewhere to hold our image URL. And finally, let's actually store the price. Now by default, it's going, when it creates these fields within the database, when it sees string, it's going to create it as an nvarchar max. Now what that means is that there will be no limit to how much information you could put in there. Now in some cases that might be what you want, if it was a long description for example, but sometimes you might want to limit it to how many characters you can have. So to do that we need to decorate it with a max length setting. Now before we can do that we need to tell the project how to do this. So if we go to references, add reference, we will go to assemblies and we want system component model data annotations. Okay. We can then type max length 255. Now this red squiggle means it doesn't quite understand how to do that, but because we've added the component there, the reference there, we can just right click, resolve and tell it to use the data annotations. That sticks this line in up here which tells it how to use that. We only really need to use that on strings. When you have things like decimals or integers, they have their own built-in length as part of the type, so we don't need to worry about that. So once that's done, we can save that off and close it, and then let's also just create an order item. Again, we need to set it as public. Again, let's have an order item ID. Let's have a product ID. This will allow us to link the product back to the individual product. Let's have a quantity. Let's have a price. Price will need to be decimal. So we can save that there like that. The next thing we're going to create is an order. Again, make it public. order date, let's have a customer ID, and finally what we want to do is we want to link order items to order. So let's have a public I collection order item, and that's why I created the order item before I created the order class. Save that off, and finally let's just create a customer. Now obviously in a real world application you would have far more information than this, but for the sake of brevity we'll just keep things nice and simple.